In 1788, Britain began sending convicts across the ocean to a land far from home, Australia. At first, the goal was simple: reduce the burden of overcrowded prisons back in England and begin colonizing a continent few Europeans had ever set foot on. Many of the men and women sent there weren't hardened criminals. Some had stolen bread, a piece of clothing, or simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time. Once their sentences ended, they could walk free and begin again in this strange new world. But others were restless, violent, and unwilling to bend to the rules of their captors. For these men, the punishment was exile within exile. They were sent to the most unforgiving corners of the Australian colonies, to prisons that were less about reform and more about breaking the spirit. Among them all, none was more feared than Sarah Island Prison, a remote settlement in Van Diemen's Land, modern-day Tasmania. Sarah Island wasn't just a prison. It was hell carved out of stone and rain, lashed by freezing winds, and surrounded by seas and wilderness so merciless that escape seemed like a death wish. But that didn't stop men from trying. And sometimes what they faced beyond those walls was far darker than anything inside. Tonight, we step back into that time, into the story of one man whose name would echo in Australia's history for the most terrifying of reasons: Alexander Pearce. His desperate bid for freedom would lead to betrayal, madness, and one of the most chilling tales of survival ever told. Transportation, as the British called it, was a sentence just short of death. Those condemned were packed into floating hulks, old ships converted into holding pens where they waited in filth, chained in darkness for the long voyage south. Disease spread fast. Many never even survived to see the New World. Those who did were packed into labor camps and prison colonies where survival itself felt like punishment. There were two kinds of convicts in this system. The obedient ones, often first-timers, might be given lighter work. If you were skilled, you could put your trade to use. Carpenters, blacksmiths, farmers, these men had some hope. They lived under guard but with a measure of stability. But the unruly, the violent, or simply the stubborn were dealt with harshly. First came ration cuts, then chains, where men were shackled together and worked until their backs broke. Their diet, scraps of bread and oatmeal, barely enough to live on. And for the worst offenders, there was Sarah Island. This bleak prison squatted on the edge of Macquarie Harbour, a place where rain seemed endless and icy winds tore through the air like knives. To the west lay the wild ocean. To the east, jagged mountains, thick rainforests, and rivers so fierce they drowned even the strongest swimmers. Farmers avoided the land because it was too waterlogged to grow crops. Survival beyond the walls was nearly impossible. That was the point. And the punishments inside? They were designed to strip away hope. Repeat offenders might be sent to sleep on bare rocks offshore, soaked to the skin, their bodies shivering under freezing rain. But the worst fate was the lash, the dreaded double cat-o'-nine tails, its heavy leather cords studded with brutal knots. One flogging could shatter ribs, tear flesh to ribbons, and leave a man crippled for months. The wounds were washed in salt water, adding agony to humiliation. But here's the cruel truth. Brutality didn't tame these men. It only drove them to despair. And for some, like Alexander Pearce, it sparked something darker: the hunger to escape, no matter the cost. Alexander Pearce wasn't born a monster. In Ireland, he was a petty thief, stealing shoes and small goods. But in 1819, at just 26, he was caught and sentenced to 7 years in Van Diemen's Land. Transportation was usually reserved for repeat offenders, so it's safe to say Alex had been in trouble before. He spent months in a prison hulk, then endured the long, miserable voyage on the Castle Forbes to Australia. Once ashore, he was sent to work as a farm laborer. It should have been a simple life. Hard work, yes, but with food, shelter, and a chance to serve out his sentence. But Pearce couldn't help himself. He stole, he drank, he fought. Time after time, he was punished, whipped, chained, and dragged back into line. He escaped once, hiding out for months only to be captured again. He forged orders, stole livestock, even embezzled turkeys. His behavior grew bolder, his punishments harsher. Finally, the authorities lost patience. In 1822, he was sent to the place of no return, Sarah Island. 4 years of chains, hard labor, and endless rain stretched before him. But for Pearce, the thought of waiting out his sentence wasn't an option. He had only one thought left: escape. On September 20th, 1822, Pearce was part of a work crew sent across the harbor to cut timber. To do the job, their shackles were removed and axes placed in their hands. It was the perfect chance. Among the group were 2 seasoned escape planners, Robert Greenhill and Matthew Travers, old friends from Ireland. They had failed before, but this time they were determined. Pearce found himself drawn into their plan. As soon as the guards were distracted, the convicts struck. They seized food, destroyed one boat, and fled in another, rowing hard across the waters before abandoning it and slipping into the wilderness. For days they fought through thick forests and freezing rain. They climbed mountains, waded rivers, and trudged barefoot over rocks as their shoes fell apart. The weather was merciless, the land unyielding. By the 5th day, their food was gone. Hunger clawed at their bellies. Desperation grew. And then, a horrifying idea took root. Someone, accounts differ on who, suggested what none dared to voice aloud: survival through cannibalism. Straws were drawn. Fate chose a man named Thomas Bodenham. He prayed for forgiveness before an axe blow ended his life. The men cooked and ate his flesh, their horror drowned out by the gnawing emptiness in their stomachs. It kept them alive. For now. The wilderness showed no mercy. The group staggered on, wet, cold, and starving. One by one, the men vanished. Some fled, perhaps trying to find their way back to the prison. Others weren't so lucky. When food ran out again, another man fell, then another. Some killings were planned, others were sudden bursts of violence. Fear grew as much as hunger. Friendships crumbled, trust dissolved. John Mathers suspected Robert Greenhill was plotting against them. He was right. Before long, Mathers was struck down too. Then fate turned crueler still. Travers, Greenhill's closest ally, was bitten by a venomous snake. His leg swelled, the pain unbearable. Robert, loyal to his old friend, tried to care for him, but Pearce urged otherwise. Travers was dying. He could not go on. Keeping him alive meant certain starvation. In the end, Travers met the same fate as the others. And once again the men fed. Only 2 remained, Robert and Alex. But by then, Pearce no longer trusted his companion. He slept lightly, clutching the axe when he could, sensing Robert's intentions. One night, he caught him in the act lifting the weapon to strike. That was all the proof he needed. Pearce made his move first. The axe fell, and Robert Greenhill lay dead. Now Pearce was utterly alone, wandering the wilderness with nothing but fragments of stolen flesh and a will to survive. Weeks later, starved and skeletal, he stumbled upon a shepherd's hut. The man barely recognized him, clothes shredded, body wasted, eyes hollow. Yet he gave him food and shelter. Pearce stayed just long enough to regain his strength before vanishing again into the bush. For over 3 months, he evaded capture. But in January 1823, near Jericho, he was caught once more. By then, his story had already begun to spread, and when he confessed what he had done, few believed him. Cannibalism was unthinkable. The authorities assumed he was lying, until, of course, he escaped again. Returned to Sarah Island, Pearce was shackled once more. But even chains couldn't suppress his restless nature. In November 1823, paired with another convict named Thomas Cox, Pearce seized another chance. They slipped away during work duty, carrying axes, a knife, and a few meager supplies. For 3 days they hid, avoiding soldiers on their trail. But soon hunger gnawed at them again. This time, there was no group to draw straws, no pretense of fairness. Pearce killed Cox outright, then ate him, and when the deed was done, he didn't even try to keep running. He simply turned himself in. When Pearce was questioned, he told his story in multiple confessions. but none of them matched perfectly. In one, the killings were agreed upon, straws drawn, fate sealed. In another, Robert Greenhill was painted as the villain, forcing others into murder. In yet another, Pearce described mercy killings, easing suffering rather than acting out of malice. Perhaps he shifted blame to protect himself. Perhaps he sought to unburden his conscience before death. Or perhaps the truth had become so twisted in his mind that even he no longer knew where it lay. What is certain is that when he finally stood at the gallows in July 1824, he confessed one last time. Before the gathered crowd, a reverend read his words, telling of betrayal, death, and the ultimate taboo. And then, with the rope around his neck, Alexander Pearce met his end. After his execution, doctors dissected his body, searching for some physical sign that explained his horrifying deeds. His skull was shipped across the ocean, studied by phrenologists who believed the shape of the head revealed character. Today, that skull rests in a museum, a grim relic of a man forever remembered as the cannibal convict. So what was Alexander Pearce really? A desperate man driven by hunger? A criminal who carried darkness long before he ever set foot in Tasmania? Or simply a victim of a system so cruel it turned men into monsters? History leaves us with fragments, with confessions that contradict and legends that grow darker with each telling. What we do know is this: survival came at the highest price. And Pearce's story stands as one of the most haunting reminders of what human beings can become when the wilderness strips away everything but the need to live. Would you have made the same choices? Or would you have chosen to starve rather than cross the unthinkable line?